My interview with the social worker, Molly Pfeiffer. Molly Pfeiffer works in family service, child care cases, and child welfare filing. She has a master's degree in social work and hours working towards a licensed clinical social work degree. She has been a social worker for 15 years. She was a family service and child care caseworker for a majority of this time and has spent the last couple years as a child welfare file worker after having kids. As a social worker, Ms. Pfeiffer works for the state. With this job, she can work from home to be with her children. As a file worker, she is in charge of making the forms required for a child being adopted through social services to be adopted. These forms include information about the child, such as why they came into care and for how long, medical history, substance abuse, paternity tests, and more. This form is required when children's parents were not successful with reunion and is required for a child to be adopted. The responsibilities of this job are to complete the form so the child can be adopted, to collect information about the child or children from as early as possible, and to collect information about the child's biological family and relatives. Ms. Pfeiffer stated that getting a report submitted and knowing a child will be adopted is a good feeling because she knows how important it is. Ms. Pfeiffer's career before working from home was working with families who had reports of abuse or neglect. She said, "Seeing a family be able to recognize areas required in change and then becoming invested in that and then just taking those steps forward is just a really amazing thing." Originally, Ms. Pfeiffer was volunteering with children in active welfare cases. After, she got a job at the Denver Family Crisis Center, helping kids who were taken into custody who didn't have spots in foster care, and she continued to move up from there. Ms. Pfeiffer said her main responsibility is ensuring safety. This begins with an interview of the child after a report has been made. She said that her day could begin with home visits, interviews, jails, attending court, meeting with families, talking to the reporting party, and you never know where it's going to go from there. She said she has to be very autonomous and timely with her schedule, stating, 9 times out of 10, I was only in my office for a couple of hours out of the day, and that would be to do field notes or attend meetings. Otherwise, you're out in the field all day long. And stabilizing is just one of the key things. The agency Ms. Pfeiffer works for is the Boulder County Department of Housing and Human Services. The agency is funded on state and federal dollars depending on what the area of work is. The agency interacts with other counties, law enforcement, attorneys, housing authority, SNAP, and more. Ms. Pfeiffer said, "At any given day, I will talk to schools, attorneys, law enforcement, any sort of community partners. And there are so many ways in becoming creative in ways to help access a family." At this agency, those starting out as caseworkers require a bachelor's degree and child care experience. Supervisors and lead caseworkers who work with high-profile and sensitive cases require a master's degree or a licensed clinical social work degree. Ms. Pfeiffer says that services provided by her agency are provided on a need-based level. These services could be anything from housing assistance, Medicaid, setting up individual or family therapy, in or outpatient care for substance abuse treatment, child care, or emergency housing. Ms. Pfeiffer says that this is a tricky job, a tough job, and that not everyone stays. She also said, "Someone who, from my perspective, is able to stay and really learn. The main thing is helping a family buy into it, wanting to participate." The population Ms. Pfeiffer serves are families and children initiated by concerns about one or multiple children. She works with many diversities such as Caucasian families, Hispanic families, African American families, Asian families, families with disabilities, and intergenerational families such as a grandma, mother, and child, as well as families with 2 mothers or 2 fathers. When asked to give an example, Ms. Pfeiffer said, "A family where both of the parents were significantly hearing impaired to the point where I needed an interpreter." She also said that Boulder has a very wide spectrum of wealth down to the people who are barely getting by. Ms. Pfeiffer says that dishonesty and fear are her biggest obstacles when dealing with cases. Being able to get through that fear with the family, that's a huge one. Their resistance, Ms. Pfeiffer said, as well as parents struggling to stay sober manifests in many ways, missing visits, not completing treatment plans. Another big obstacle is resources being cut off to families who she has had to work with more than once. Another one is being in an undervalued career. She says, "Because it is such a female-driven occupation, it is very undervalued, and that is affected in your pay scale." She mentions that I think the hardest part is seeing a kid scared, seeing a kid who's been injured or is living in a home with domestic violence, really, really upsetting. Ms. Pfeiffer says that the most important things in social work are respect, self-care, and empathy. She says, understanding that you are oftentimes in an unwanted presence, but a necessary one. She states, being able to set the job down, especially when it's very hard, is very important. She also states that you have to set your ego aside and not take things personally. If a family is failing to make progress, that has nothing to do with you, as long as you're doing your job, she says. Thank you for watching my presentation.